Again, everybody, thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it. This is a sensitive topic. People definitely have their opinions on it. But we want to respect each other's opinions here as well. No name calling, no shouting. Remember, this is being live streamed and you are being recorded. And then if you could also silence your cell phones as well. And we've already had quite a few questions submitted online, but we're always looking for more from the audience. So once again, to reiterate that, if you need a piece of paper, just raise your hand. I've got Kelsey, I've got Hannah, I've got Jenna walking around, ready to give you a little piece of paper. They'll take it back from me, run it up here to me, and we'll try to get to it a little bit later in the evening. It's a fairly standard format here tonight. I'm just going to do a brief introduction of all of our panelists, and then after that, we'll get right to the questions that were submitted online, and then after that, we'll get to the ones that came from the audience. So without further ado, let's go to Skype first. First off, we have Daniel Del Monte. Daniel is the Deputy Director of the Community Services Division for El Dorado County Health and Human Services Agency. Daniel spent 3 years of his career working for the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office as the Operations Manager with Family Justice Center of Sonoma County. That's a one-stop shop for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, and dating violence. Daniel has extensive county-level experience, including the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office and Solano County's Health and Human Services Department, where he spent 2 years as the county's homeless coordinator, supporting the county's growth and enhancement of their continuum of care and system response to homelessness. Daniel started with El Dorado County in February 2017. Current programs within his division include senior services, animal services, emergency medical services, energy assistance programs, and the Public Housing Authority. So welcome, Daniel.
Thank you.
Next on Skype, we have Dr. Benjamin Henwood. Dr. Henwood is a recognized expert in mental health and housing service research, whose work connects clinical interventions with social policy. He is a co-author of Housing First, Ending Homelessness, Transforming Systems, and Changing Lives, and his proposal to end homelessness has been adopted by the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare as a grand challenge to orient the profession. Dr. Henwood is currently an assistant professor of social work at the University of Southern California. So welcome, Dr. Henwood.
Thank you.
We'll just go in order here. We have Cheyenne Lane next. Cheyenne is the Supportive Services Coordinator at Tahoe Youth and Family Services and oversees the street outreach, basic center, preventative service, and drop-in center programs for runaway, homeless, and high-risk youth here in South Lake Tahoe, Douglas County, and Alpine County. As a youth, she spent 7 years homeless and living on the streets across America. When she was 22, she got help through a street outreach program in Vermont and spent the next 2 years working through a transitional living program. After she completed the program, she moved back to Tahoe, where a job search led to a position at Tahoe Youth and Family Services as a youth advocate. She's been working with our runaway and homeless youth for the past 12 years. She participates in 3 different continuums of care: Partners Against Trafficking of Humans, Healthy Communities, and the newly formed Homeless Multidisciplinary Team. Welcome, Cheyenne. Ooh, where is Marissa? Okay. And then next we have Rabbi Evan Yakar. Rabbi Yakar was ordained in June 2007 from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he has also earned his Master of Hebrew Letters degree. Evan moved to South Lake Tahoe with his wife Rachel during the summer of 2011. He became the second rabbi of Temple Bat Yan, the Jewish community of South Lake Tahoe and Valley regions. Now, as a family of 4, plus their dog Sasha, they enjoy the mountain lifestyle, whether playing in the snow or enjoying the lake. In July of 2017, Rabbi Yakar engaged as the rabbi of North Tahoe Hebrew congregation in Tahoe Vista, bringing together the Lake Tahoe Basin Jewish community. Welcome, Rabbi Yakar. And next up, we have Dr. Marissa Muscat. Dr. Muscat is a medical doctor who works as a hospitalist for Barton Health. She participated in community meetings hosted by the Lake Tahoe Collaborative in 2015 related to homelessness and took a leadership role which resulted in the creation of a new nonprofit, Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless, which founded the South Lake Tahoe Warm Room. She is currently the executive director of that organization, in addition to being a member of the board of directors at Live Violence Free. Marissa holds a medical degree from Michigan State University and a Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Marissa. And last but certainly not least, we have Lieutenant Dave Stevenson. doctorate in police. Yeah, Lieutenant Stevenson has lived and or worked in South Lake Tahoe for 40 years. He moved here in '77 when he was 5 years old and graduated from South Tahoe High in 1990. After earning his bachelor's degree in criminal justice from California State University, Sacramento in '94, he put himself through the Napa College Police Academy, graduating in '94, #1 in his class. He was hired by the South Lake Police Department in 1995. Over the past 22 years, he served as patrol officer, field training officer, detective, SWAT team leader, sergeant, and was promoted to lieutenant in 2007. He currently oversees the patrol division of the police department. So welcome, Lieutenant Stevenson. All right, so now that we've got all of these out of the way, let's go ahead and start off. And just so you know, we do give a little warm-up question to everybody just to kind of give them a chance to explain who they are, where they're coming from, and these questions were actually submitted to them ahead of time. So they know what's coming, hopefully, and we'll go from there. So we're gonna just go in a random order here, and we're gonna go ahead and start off with Marissa. And we're trying to ask everybody to stay to 2 minutes or less. I know that's a little bit difficult, so I'll try not to cut you off. But usually the first one takes a little bit longer, but then after that we'll try to be pretty strict just so we can get through all the questions. So can you give us an overview on the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless and some stats on the people you serve through the Warm Room?
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless truly appreciates the Tahoe Region and professionals and their efforts to promote education on this and other topics that are pertinent to our community. Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless was formed as a grassroots movement. There was a group of individuals in this community who was spurred to action by Diana Hankins from the National Alliance on Mental Illness to create an overnight winter shelter for homeless individuals in our community. And the Tahoe Collaborative spearheaded this with community meetings, and our coalition includes volunteers and supporters that are nonprofit personnel, healthcare advocates, county employees, social workers, people of faith, concerned citizens, business owners, people who have formerly been homeless, or people who are homeless advocates. And as you mentioned, our main project is the South Lake Tahoe Warm Room. We opened our doors for our pilot winter in December of 2015, and we've since been open for 2 winter seasons. In total, we've been open 239 nights since inception, providing 5,561 shelter bed nights. In our second season, we served 148 different individuals, and that includes 136 in the Warm Room and 7 families with children under the age of 18 who were provided up to 1 week in a motel. The Warm Room averaged 27 guests nightly, 20 men and 7 women last winter. The average day was 25 nights. The other point I'd like to mention is our guests are largely local. 87% of our guests last winter were living in the South Shore when they became homeless. This is similar to national numbers of 88%, and for comparison, the lowest number I've ever seen is 71%, which is San Francisco. 26% of our guests were employed in the Warm Room when they entered. 14% met the definition of chronically homeless, and only 26 individuals that we served in the first season actually returned for the second season. I think the last part of the question is a little bit about sort of the future of our organization, that we just had a full day of strategic planning today, so if I don't make complete sentences, that's why. But, you know, the statistics don't tell the human stories. We had a little survey of some of our guests, and I want to share a couple of their comments. Some people said there's efficiency and efficacy in how the place is run. It's more than comfort. It shows that it's a lot of work, and it says a lot about the community. And another guest said, there are solutions to this problem that are easily fixed, and the Warm Room helps give me the confidence that I can solve my own problems. So I think that's the sort of spirit we try to garner in the Warm Room. And ultimately, you know, we want to plan to work on our mission and to continue to hopefully operate an overnight emergency shelter. There are challenges to that based on the temporary nature of this program. We would like to grow our agency towards best practices, which are housing first and rapid rehousing options. And we also depend a lot on the community. So we want to work in collaboration with other businesses or nonprofits to try to share space to create some stability for us there. And we have to raise funds and continue to financially support ourselves. And so I encourage you to check out our website. It's tahoehomeless.org. Consider attending one of our events. We have a fundraiser coming and a community awareness event that's coming up, and you can see how you can donate or support us in some other way or volunteer. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to provide support and services for some of our community's most vulnerable members in the future.
Thank you, Doctor. That's all right. The first question is usually the longest. That's fine. Cheyenne, who does Tahoe Youth and Family Services serve, and what are some of the causes for homelessness that you've seen in the community?
So Tahoe Youth and Family Service we're a youth serving agency. We provide basic center services for youth up to the age of 18. Our whole goal with our basic center program is homeless prevention. We want to make sure that we can prevent young people from becoming the homeless adults that we see. And so we do a lot of preventative services. Sorry. Oh, stand up. We do a lot of preventative services in our schools. We do life skills groups, leadership groups, the Girls Project group, and all of this is to self-empower, to give kids self-esteem, to make sure that they have the skills to grow into productive adults. A lot of the kids that we do serve and we do see through the Basic Center program have generational poverty, mental health illnesses, and so we need to make sure that they are set to become the best that they can be. We also run a street outreach program that provides a drop-in center. And in that drop-in center, it's for youth up to the age of 24, and these are the street kids. These kids come from a mirage of different reasons of why they're homeless. A lot of them are similar, but they're all unique. We have a lot of young people that are aged out foster youth. Unfortunately, the services that have led them to homelessness hasn't catered and helped them become productive. And there's also that innate feeling with foster youth, aged out foster youth in particular, and adopted youth that I've seen come through our doors, is that feeling of being abandoned has really triggered them into hopelessness, drug abuse, and when you do drugs and you participate in alcohol, you make bad choices, and we all know that. We also have a lot of young people that come in that maybe have started out doing drugs and then that has gotten progressively worse. We have generational homelessness. You would be amazed at how many young people's parents I've met. We have mental health diagnoses that has not been taken care of. Young people, I like to say, we have much more of a transient population with young people because young people run away from their situations. And so they run away from the towns that they are in or in the abusive situations they are in. And then that leads me into the fact that young people that come from abusive homes. They're mentally abused, physically abused, sexually abused, and so they're out there trying to find a way to survive. We also have young people that come in that are just trying to find themselves. They're just out traveling and they're enjoying the aspects of that, but you can only be on the streets for so long before it takes a toll. And so we are there to provide resources. Our motto is to get recharged, get resources, and get respect. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. All right, this next question is for Daniel via Skype. Daniel, what's the county's role in addressing homelessness within our community? And is there a plan that residents can view online?
Yeah, thank you. It's a county really plays a role in addressing homelessness in El Dorado County. In terms of direct services, Health and Human Services, my department, provides a variety of supportive services from senior services, CalWorks programs for low-income families, CalFresh or food stamps, signing up folks for Medi-Cal, behavioral health services, public health services, and those are just some of the opportunities for folks to reach self-sufficiency through my department, which often serve homeless individuals. Another example of service provision from the county is through the Sheriff's Department, who recently created the Homeless Outreach Team, or known as the HOT Team. And they provide outreach onto the street or into encampments and help individuals connect to available supports that might better position themselves to obtain housing and stability in the community. Across many regions, HOT teams are becoming a best practice, and so it's great to see this integrated into El Dorado County. But beyond immediate services and outreach efforts, the county, in partnership with local stakeholders, have played a significant role in working to establish a regional coordinated response to homelessness. Going back to 2013, the Chief Administrative Office, on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, convened an interagency task force to examine the issue of homelessness, and they called this group Opportunity Knocks. So representatives of this group included nonprofits, faith-based organizations, private partnerships, government organizations, and all these folks work together toward a common goal. So the vision over the last years was to nurture a data system to accurately capture the current status of homeless individuals in this county so that there could be a strategic effort to provide housing and services to meet the current needs of residents. In support of that vision, as well as greater regional coordination over the past year, the strong emphasis of Opportunity Knocks was to support the launch of a coordinated entry system. Coordinated entry systems allow regions across the United States to really maximize local coordination, access, and utilization of services. And so the idea behind it is that as folks might enter a coordinated entry system, it could be through fixed brick and mortar locations, through a phone access line, or through outreach teams. But regardless of how somebody enters the system, there's one intake regionally for all housing programs. And so what that does is it allows the region to capture accurate data and create what's called a by name list, where you can assess a prioritized list of individuals based on vulnerability. Because ultimately there's needs from youth to seniors, to veterans, to families, and everybody in between. So if we could only pursue a fixed number of funding streams, what would a region pursue first and why? So by having this regional data, a system can assess where the priorities might lie, i.e. the most vulnerable individuals, the highest cost folks on our systems, and we can be very strategic with planning and the growth of that system. So continuums of care are the HUD programs that operate coordinated entry systems, and COCs are responsible for promoting these systems, which in turn create the opportunity for folks to leverage funding streams for nonprofits, for state and local governments, all focused on permanently housing individuals and providing the services necessary to stabilize. So in being responsible for managing coordinated entry, COCs promote the access of these systems. And since I mentioned Opportunity Knocks was created to coordinate regional efforts. So earlier this year in May, the Opportunity Knocks board voted to merge with the COC, creating El Dorado Opportunity Knocks Continuum of Care. HUD has placed a deadline for regions across the United States to launch a coordinated entry system, and that deadline is January 23rd, 2018. So Opportunity Knocks Continuum of Care is taking very strategic, specific efforts to make sure that a compliant system is launched by January. And additionally, the COC's website will be up and launched in September. So this question referenced a plan that folks could access. Once that website's launched, local data can be accessed there, as well as information on coordinated entry and future strategic plans that come out of Opportunity Knocks Continuum of Care.
All right, thank you. So just to clarify, it sounds like there's a website coming, but as of right now, there isn't a website that the community can go to see a comprehensive picture of what's being done to address this issue?
Correct. So in September, that website will launch. And as the COC is growing, we're seeking to really create the means to capture as accurate of data as we can with the limited resources we have, as COCs vary in sort of how long they've been functioning and how they've been able to be strategic in adding depth to their system, adding capacity in organizations. So this year, the COC is really focusing on getting the right training to agencies so that they can grow their ability to capture accurate data to then inform strategic planning over this coming year.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Next question is for Rabbi Yakar. As a member of the faith community, is there currently a plan or is a plan in the works for future interfaith collaborations to address homeless issues in our community? And additionally, can you speak to your own Temple Bat Yam's efforts?
Thank you, Matt. Thank you to Tahoe Regional Young Professionals for putting this on and shedding some light on this issue and giving us an opportunity to share. I'm not an expert on the faith community at large. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on the Jewish community in Tahoe and have great partnerships and relationships with some of the other faith leaders in our community. When I was given this question and I was watching the news and seeing what's happening in Houston this week, my heart certainly goes out to the victims and those affected, and certainly my deepest condolences to those who've lost loved ones. But I'm also inspired by the ways in which church communities, mosque communities, synagogue communities, all faith communities have reached out and have provided support in various ways, from mega churches on down to the smallest communities that we're seeing in reports that are coming through and things being shared through social media. And I see a very similar thing happening in our own community, in that there are some of us who have responded institutionally by our synagogues, our churches, responding and partnering with the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless and reaching out to the county resources that are out there and figuring out ways that we can support within our bandwidth. And I see also certain communities, some of us who have members and parishioners who are responding out of their own individuality and their own desire and their own personal charge and obligation to support our fellow human beings. We've supported as a faith community by being part of the advisory council of the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless for the last 2+ years, providing opportunities for partnership, access to our communications with our members, providing space for volunteer trainings, advisory council meetings and board meetings for the Coalition for the Homeless, partnering with other congregations outside of our own community to learn about their own responses and bringing that information back. I believe that, while I said I don't speak for the whole faith community, I'm confident that we're all continuing to do the things that we have been doing, and some have pre-existed my time here. Bread and broth, second serving, the backpack program for kids in our schools on summer break and on vacations and on Fridays, various programs that provide supply drives and food drives throughout the year as a way to support the symptoms of those who are battling and dealing with homelessness and insufficient housing. One of the things that I've recognized when I'm thinking about this question is that most of our responses are dealing with the symptoms, and we've not yet arrived at a coordinated way to address the systemic realities that lead to the homelessness challenges for people in our community or for our neighbors. I'm optimistic about the opportunity to have those conversations and start to discover ways that we can respond as a faith community in partnership with others around the South Shore to tackle some of the systemic causes. But I will share that this morning, a colleague, Pastor Diana Turner of Hope Lutheran, gathered and convened our second interfaith clergy breakfast, which is the second of 2 since I've been here in 6 years of clergy gathering to break bread together, to share ideas, and to support one another, and to identify needs in the community. And so while I can't speak for the entire faith community, I did ask them for their permission this morning that those who were able to be there this morning, some were not able to be there, but I know that Reverend Bob Kelly from Lake Tahoe Presbyterian, Victoria Warren from St. John's Episcopal, and the intern on the way to ordination, Peter Sloz Cox, who I just met this morning, so I hope I got that right, Peter, and Father Mauricio of St. Teresa's, and certainly Pastor Diana Turner and myself are continuing that conversation, open to continued partnerships in ways that we can be of service to the wider community. Specific to Temple Bat Yam, providing a meeting space is one of the things that we've done for the coalition that I am proud of because we have a space that we like to share. Calling on volunteers and inspiring members of our community. Brenda McLeod is our social justice chair who's here this evening, who has worked tirelessly to inspire members of the Bat Yam community and the wider faith community to get involved. Supply drives, financial contributions, and one thing I'm particularly proud of is that our own religious school students collected tzedakah, which means charity, this past year, and collected over $100 of their own money to buy supplies for the guests at the Warm Room. I want to share one thought in closing. I was asked to be here as a faith representative, and I am a rabbi, and of course I like to talk.
Yes, you do.
But that one of the things that's really important in this context in dealing with homelessness and insufficient housing and reaching out to our neighbors is understanding why. And that it's a very uncomfortable issue. I don't think it's controversial, but it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of concerns about part of our population who are vulnerable, people who deal with homelessness, and yet they're human beings. And the prophet Isaiah taught us that we shall take the poor into our homes. This is something that is upon each of us in the faith community, that we have to take this on and figure out ways that we can respond, whether it's out of a sense of faith or just out of a sense of being a neighbor and the moral imperative that comes with being a neighbor. One of the greatest teachings from the Jewish tradition is when we're confronted with those overwhelming religious and spiritual tasks and things about reaching out and making our world a better place, it's sometimes daunting. But the Jewish tradition teaches us that we must begin, And Rabbi Tarfon taught us something that I try to share with everyone I meet, and that it's not our responsibility to finish the work of perfecting our world, but we're not free to desist from it. So we have to begin. And again, I commend the TRYP for putting this on to beginning that conversation for the whole community.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think that's a great segue into our next question for Dr. Henwood, because Evan talked a little bit about dealing with symptoms. I was able to peek a little bit into Dr. Henwood's book, look under the cover a little bit. So the question for you, Dr. Henwood, is can you give a brief explanation of what your research covers, and more specifically, what you found out so far and next steps?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and thanks very much for having me tonight. I studied different aspects of homelessness, but I think what you were referring to is mostly, looking at interventions that were designed for this aging homeless population that we first identified in the early 1980s when sort of the visible street homeless epidemic became apparent. And, and what we found in looking at systems that were meant to address, well-intentioned systems meant to address that problem and that population, is that a lot of the programs that were designed and built to address the issue kind of fundamentally missed the mark. And a lot of the reasons that happened had to do with some presumptions about why people were homeless and why they stayed homeless in the first place. Meaning that we basically attributed homelessness to either attributes of the individual, like they have a mental illness, or their behaviors, like they, abuse substances, and that's the reason that they sort of found their lot in life that way. And so we built programs where really we tried to change people and change people's behavior by making them sober, by making them comply with what doctors had to say, what social workers had to say. Again, all of which was to change the individual. And I guess the thing that was most problematic is that we made the thing that people needed most, which was housing, contingent on them first being successful in completing those programs and those treatments. And it took us a good 20 years during which time homelessness grew in the country and got a lot worse, and really, sort of became this intractable problem that I think, most people my age and younger have lived with this idea that homelessness is sort of this inevitable part of life in the U.S. But, it took us a long time to realize that really we needed to flip our system on its head and first provide people with access to that affordable housing to really address that issue of homelessness itself, and then work with them to figure out, what parts of their lives or themselves that they want to change and how can we help them. So my research has looked and focused really on a lot of, this approach known as Housing First, what it is and what it isn't, and I'll just kind of say a couple things about that. Housing First, it is an evidence-based practice. It's been rigorously tested using randomized controlled trials, but it's predicated on the importance of self-determination and empowerment. It's pretty effective at ending homelessness, and it's actually less expensive than leaving people on the streets. Again, I'm talking that sort of that street homeless aging population that sort of incur a lot of like public health costs through various other systems that they get mixed up with. What Housing First isn't, it's not free housing. It helps people get in, but they do pay 30% of their income. It's not housing only. This is not, here's a voucher, here's your landlord, good luck. You need support services really to help people kind of navigate just any issue that comes up. And it's also not the answer to everything. So, it gives people housing, but that doesn't mean that they automatically cure addiction, which is a chronic condition, or that they are fully and gainfully employed. So it's not a cure-all, but it is a very effective intervention for chronic homeless at least. And the last thing I'll just say about that is it also is ultimately a downstream approach. I mean, it's dealing with a problem once it's already occurred. And just to kind of echo the rabbi's sentiments, there are lots of more structural reasons that people end up homeless. And I think we see this especially in California, especially with affordability issues. Places like California and on the coast where housing is most expensive, they're bucking the trend. The rest of the country, homelessness has been on the decline for the past 10 years plus, in part because of approaches like Housing First, but not in these places where housing is inaccessible and unaffordable. And so that, I think that really speaks to kind of some of the fundamental issues that need to be addressed.
All right, thank you. That was a great answer. And this question is for Lieutenant Stevenson. What is the Southlake Police Department doing to address public safety concerns related to the homeless population in South Lake Tahoe?
Thanks, Matt. And again, whoa, hold the mic up close. It's very loud. Again, I reiterate the thanks to everybody here at TRYP and everyone who makes this happen. It's a lot of work, so I appreciate it. Appreciate being invited. So public safety, the police department over the last 8 months to a year, obviously this is a huge issue in our community. We at the police department and public safety in general, fire department, I know the hospital, we deal with this issue a lot. So we came up with a two-prong approach over the last 8 months or so. Then the first prong of that approach was really to collaborate with other city departments, community departments, businesses, and the community as a whole. So we started going to meetings, we went to outreach things, we met with businesses, and Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless was a major component of that. Our chief started meeting with them, I can't remember how long ago, almost a year ago, at least a year ago. And we learned a lot from each other, from those groups, from businesses, and it was very helpful to us. We learned that we knew this already. It's hard to convince all the police this. I knew it growing up here, but the police department, when it gets to us, when that person picks up the phone and says, there's this person in the park doing X, Y, or Z, that's a very small piece of the pie of what homelessness is. We're just dealing with that one piece of the pie when it comes to law enforcement per se, and really focused on those people who really are either crooks, they have serious mental health issues, serious addiction issues, they are in our community, oh yeah, and they're also homeless. So that's the sliver that mostly we deal with. And it's a sensitive and a very loud and very visible sliver of that population in the community. So the second prong of our approach over starting really, we prepared for it in the winter time, was basically enforcement. Last summer, I don't know if everybody, maybe nobody noticed, maybe some did, maybe some didn't. Last summer compared to this summer so far, I believe the public safety issues have been reduced in those public, real, visible, common use places. The transit centers, the beaches, Lakeview Commons, Reagan Beach. We had a really hard time responding to calls for service. Is there a riot outside or something going on? Oh, no. Okay, good. Sorry. So the second prong of that approach was enforcement, and it had to do with laws that already exist on the books for our parks and public common use spaces. This summer, I think we were effective. We were able to help through Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless and the Warm Room. They helped us by educating things we wanted communicated to that population. We were able to talk to them, and we knew that there was probably about 20 people who we both dealt with of those 128 families or whatever, a very small percentage. And I think that's helped us. And then just enforcing public safety issues. I keep saying that, but I don't define what it is. So urinate in the park, human feces, vomit, garbage, trash, sleeping bags, the public restrooms, things like that. They took a beating from this very small sliver of people who used and abused those facilities in those very high visible common use public places. We talked to Parks and Rec. We would get the photographs on our iPhones, like this is what the bathroom looked like this morning. We would respond to people who are just passed out, sleeping literally in the sprinkler at Lakeview Commons at 5 a.m. and it's 45 degrees. It sounds funny, but it's not. People could die with that. So, and they're out sleeping like a baby. I'm like, if I could only sleep like that. So we, jail is not the place where these people need to go. We usually issue citations. We work with the jail as well. But there's a lot of issues. So that's been our two-prong approach. It's worked well, but it's just a Band-Aid. It deals with a small sliver of the population. But it was really necessary for all those common use areas that we use in the community. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Stevenson. All right, so those were some of our, what I would call canned questions that we had. Now we're going to go to what was submitted online and then also some in the audience as well. And I think I'd like to start off with Cheyenne, if you don't mind. And it's a pretty general question. And again, if you can keep your answer to roughly 2 minutes. But why do you think people remain homeless or choose to remain homeless?
That's a good question. It's a personal choice for some to remain homeless. For what I see, it is mental health, substance abuse, no family, nowhere to go, no one to disappoint, no one that cares about you. Just that whole feeling of hopelessness is what I see when people continue to stay homeless. Or they just don't have the support. There's no support for them. There's no like housing first programs or rapid rehousing or shelters or anywhere that they can go to better themselves. Because I was having a conversation earlier in the drop-in center with a young man that's there, and like to get a job, just to go into a job interview is tough enough. Could you imagine if you had a rough night's sleep, it rained, you know, people were harassing you, you couldn't find a safe place to sleep, you had to find a place to take a shower, to get your laundry done, to brush your teeth, and then you have to go into a job interview? That is amazingly impossible for anybody to do. So those are some of the characteristics and some of the things I've noticed why people continue to stay homeless.
Awesome, thank you. This next question is for Marissa or Dr. Muscat. Are the people that come to the Tahoe Warm Room required to be sober? And if not, why?
So in our discussions as an advisory council when we first created the Warm Room, we did a lot of research and communicated with emergency shelters in other communities like Reno and Sacramento. We talked to police officers, we talked to the hospital, and we do not require guests to be sober. We require our guests to behave in a specific code of conduct. And there are a few reasons for that. As a physician, I can probably tell if you're on meth or if you're drunk or if you're, you know, high on some other substance because I've had some training in that. Our volunteers and staff might not be able to tell if someone is behaving inappropriately because they're drunk or because they're mentally ill. And figuring that out, I don't want my staff or my volunteers to do that because you might be intoxicated but be able to come into the warm room and get a cot and go to sleep and behave properly. And those individuals are actually the most at risk on the streets. From a health perspective, as a physician, I can tell you, a drunk person sleeping outside in the cold is much more at risk for health issues than someone who's not intoxicated because they don't notice they're impaired. They can sleep through a sprinkler at 45 degrees. So it's not safe or reasonable. And again, how do I draw that line? There's a person who could have a blood alcohol level of 0.1 who you would not know was intoxicated. And am I going to breathalyze everyone? You know, that's an expensive process. So we choose to make our facility as low a barrier as possible. That's a little bit of a best practice where you try not to create too many obstacles to someone obtaining shelter so that they can obtain resources. And we do things to try to help people with their sobriety if we need to. We helped connect a few guests last year to our county alcohol and drug programs. Some of our guests got into a rehab program because of that. We have a morning program that includes drug and alcohol substance use support group. So we refer people to Tahoe Turning Point, which does a lot of substance use support in our community. So we try to assist our guests in many ways without requiring them to behave in a certain way to obtain our services.
All right. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to go back to Lieutenant Stevenson here. There's a lot of questions about this, so I'm going to try to just synthesize it a little bit. And it's in regards to the homeless camps, be it on the California Tahoe Conservancy or I know of one that's behind John Shear's place. I stumbled upon it myself on my way to Live at Lakeview. So what can citizens do to curb these illegal camps?
Where's John Shear's place?
It's like his Tahoe Sport Fishing right there.
Okay,
You don't know, John?
wait, 50. Sorry, what was the question again?
It's all right. Illegal camps, and what can we as a community do about them?
Yeah, they in our approach of enforcement, if you call it, when do police take action and what do they do? The camps kind of came second. So as we had time and personnel to deal with issues, we do go out behind Motel 6, which is a labyrinth of willow bushes and camps. The area you talk about, Lily Beach, all these spots that we all kind of know about, yes, there's camps out there. There are certain rules and regulations, and there's been court decisions about cops just coming in and throwing everybody's stuff away. It's not against the law to be homeless. That's sometimes their only possessions, and it's important for us to remember that. So we do have a homeless liaison officer who came to us from Sacramento. He worked for Sacramento Parks. He had a background in it. It's Officer Johnny Spaeth. I'll burn him. He's not here. He dealt with that a lot in Sacramento, and he's done a great job for us as well. There's certain things that have to occur for us to clean those places up. We get photos of barbecues that are hidden in the willow bushes, sleeping bags, trash, and it's his job to go out there and ascertain, is it an abandoned camp? Is it really just trash? Under those conditions, we do contact people and pull that stuff out. If it looks like someone's living there, we try to make contact when they're there, give them the opportunity, try to provide them, connect them with resources. But camps per se, we're lucky enough yet, knock on wood, although I think it's coming, we don't have any really strong entrenched, they're there year-round camps yet. We did have a really long discussion with, I think someone called it the HOT team on the West Slope, which is El Dorado County's homeless something team, outreach team. They have a really good program in place, and we spent a lot of time talking to Sergeant Cook at El Dorado County, successful things that they're doing, so we're gearing up for that. But right now we're checking them on a weekly basis, getting rid of the junk, getting rid of the trash, taking care of the fire concerns, because that's very serious to us as well, and dealing with it that way.
All right, and just a quick follow-up on that, because I think that is a concern for people. Last summer, we had a lot of these spot fires that were popping up around our community. And so is there, if you do find an illegal fire area or a barbecue or something, is that camp then treated differently or monitored a little bit differently than one that did not have a campfire?
The campfires are dealt with right away. The issue you're talking about was actually, I believe, what we believe to be, there was like an investigation going on with all those fires that occurred. That was not homeless, as far as we know. That was like a serial, like, firebug kind of thing. So, but you're welcome. I hope I didn't say too much just now. Anyway, but when we find those camps, obviously, if it's big enough, we put it out. We call the fire department. They come out. They'll put it out. We clean it up, make sure it's safe. If nobody's there, we don't really do anything. We don't have anything to do. If someone is there, we counsel them. Rarely we write citations. We will sometimes. Depends on the jurisdiction. Depends on who's there. Depends on how egregious it was, et cetera. But we don't tolerate the fire stuff. It gets more attention.
All right, thank you. We're going to turn now to Dr. Henwood. What research is still needed to discover the root cause and solutions to this issue?
I think there is research needed primarily, I think, on prevention efforts. I mean, I think we have really good responses now to homelessness once it's occurred, as it's occurring. But, if you look at kind of the social conditions, I know just here in Los Angeles, homelessness went up 23% in this past year. And that's despite the fact that LA has housed more people, more chronically homeless people than anywhere else in the country. And so you can keep pulling people right out of the water to save them. But I think really we need to understand a bit more about prevention. And the problem with prevention is that, there are lots of people who are living in poverty, who are sort of on the verge of homelessness. But most of those people don't become homeless. And so, it'd be great if we could sort of have affordable housing for everyone, but we don't. And so if we have limited resources, how do we know how to target those? And the research doesn't give us a whole lot. I mean, there's some evidence, but basically, they talk about efficiency. So how do you know who to target so that if you give them that, they won't become homeless, and if you don't, they will, right? So versus helping people who wouldn't have become homeless anyway. So I think that's kind of the biggest gap right now in the research.
All right. This next question is for Daniel. Daniel, I don't know how much you're aware of this, but in our town, we kind of refer to Echo Summit as the granite wall, meaning that we often feel overlooked here as a community when policy is made off the hill. So is Tahoe being looked at as a specific issue, or is this being looked at overall as an entire El Dorado County issue by your team?
So I would say that it's certainly being looked at as an overall region for the whole county, and also with sort of, the unique pockets on the west slope and in the Tahoe Basin, and how we can provide localized assistance that meets the needs of each intricate community. But continuums of care in nature are responsible for supporting the entire region. So Opportunity Knox Continuum of Care is responsible for the entirety of El Dorado County. So as a system like Coordinated Entry launches, there would be entry points in South Lake Tahoe, on the west slope, and all providers, no matter where they're located within the system, would be sort of receiving referrals for the most vulnerable wherever they come into the system. So it's being looked at for the entire geography of El Dorado County. Having worked in two different counties, I recognize the geographical challenges of El Dorado. It creates sort of unique variables that the region will have to be creative in terms of entry points and how to really maximize folks coming into the system, and how agencies might coordinate or get folks in touch with one another's supports. But the short answer is the system is focusing on the entire county, including, of course, South Lake Tahoe and the West Slope combined.
Absolutely.
I just want to tag briefly. Is that on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to just add to what Daniel said to say that El Dorado Opportunity Knox is our continuum of care, and Cheyenne and I both sit on the board of that continuum of care, and we, I think, feel that we're being heard at the county level perhaps more than ever before. Does that sound fair? And our agencies, both Tahoe Youth and Family Services and Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless, have received a grant in conjunction with a nonprofit in the West Slope called Only Kindness to begin our coordinated entry that Daniel explained earlier in his introduction. And I think that that will ultimately move our county and our community in a better direction for obtaining more resources at that level.
Thank you.
So if I might add one more small piece, in that, having started in El Dorado County back in February, I can't speak for how the COC was fully administered or how, agencies were engaged across the county before that. But what I can say is that COCs are required to engage new agencies and to engage new stakeholders to ensure that there's equal access to funding, that there's equal opportunities for all, and that the system can really provide funding for successful programs. So ones that successfully create the highest housing retention rates for the folks that are being served in their programs. And so I certainly am supporting the system, and I'm not looking in the rearview mirror and how things have been in the past, and really focusing on what the system needs to move forward, and that will require engaging all stakeholders across the county.
All right, thank you. I want to go to a question that we had online that's a little bit lengthy, and it's possibly could be answered by Marissa and Cheyenne, but if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free. I have worked directly with the South Lake Tahoe homeless population for over 5 years, and because of my job, I cannot be very public with my opinions. I've observed a direct correlation of the increase in transient homeless population with the opening of the winter warm room 2 winters ago. I would like our community to know that many transient homeless people have come and are still coming to our community and are not moving on because they are relying on the warm room to reopen, which strains local resources. Has the warm room, in your opinions, been as counterproductive as I believe it to be? And then a follow-up to that would be, is there plans for a permanent shelter?
So I guess I'd like to start by saying that my data doesn't really support that. As I mentioned earlier, 87% of our guests were living in were living in the South Shore when they became homeless. 87%.
Can you, just not to
yes.
interrupt you, but when you say 87%, we all have a definition of what local means. So how long have
Right.
they lived here?
It doesn't
to
mean
be
that they lived here for 20 years, which I know is the definition of local.
I don't have my badge yet.
So it doesn't mean that. What we use is the HUD definition, which is the last place that they held a permanent residence for 90 days or more. So 87% of our population met that criteria, and it was 86% in our first winter. Additionally, I would say that these people, that's a terrible way to say that. People who experience homelessness have been in this community since long before the warm room opened. It's the whole reason the warm rooms exist is because people in this community saw that need. Are there people who float through Lake Tahoe? There absolutely are. And in the summer, we see that increase. We've all seen that increase, but Tahoe is an amazing place that people want to come and visit. Are there some people that may not leave town because our emergency shelter is open for 3 to 4 months in the winter? Perhaps. If you've been to the warm room, it provides a warm bed and a cup of noodles. It is not a resort experience. It is not a comfortable, it is just a basic need that we're fulfilling, and I believe that it's important to fulfill it regardless of why someone comes or why someone becomes homeless. We do not have plans for a permanent shelter right now. We are a very early grassroots organization, and our goal is to continue to function at the level that we're functioning to maintain ourselves, to not burn out my volunteers and my employees and our community. The question of can you repeat the last part of that?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on a permanent shelter? And to follow that up,
Part right before that, maybe.
oh, I'm so sorry. No, it was basically, what do you say to people like me who feel that this is attracting people, a homeless community to South Lake Tahoe?
I guess what I would say is what I said, is that is not what we've experienced. And if you want a big number for people who are not local is, like I said, San Francisco, 71% of people don't meet that criteria of being local previously. The national number is 88%. Our number is 87%. So I think that we are on target with the rest of the country as far as that local number goes. And I largely think that's because we have a very big housing issue here and an affordability issue. And I think that is probably not going to go away. And so I guess that's all I have to say.
Yeah, could I just echo a couple of those? I mean, this idea, which is often referred to as like the magnet effect, where is often cited as a reason for not implementing sort of good services for homeless services because people are afraid that it will, quote unquote, attract a homeless population. And I have to just echo that the data doesn't really support that. There's no evidence to show that that really has occurred in different places. What little's been sort of looked at just from a kind of a research perspective, it seems, the reason that people move is for the same reason anybody else does, for family, for jobs, for opportunities, but most people don't identify as homeless and then look for the best place to be homeless. And the data usually kind of supports that. Most people are local in the homeless counts that people do across the country that usually plays out.
I'm going to add one other thing.
I'm also happy to add some context as well, just echoing statements from Dr. Henwood and Dr. Muscat. Continuums of care conduct the point-in-time counts biannually, and they're done in a 1-week time frame in January. And that ensures that there's not duplication in count across the United States as these counts are conducted. And it's also conducted in the heart of winter so that it's easier to count folks who are sheltered and who are on the street. And so the fact that, Dr. Muscat referenced the 71% number in San Francisco being residents, Sacramento's most recent count was also that 71% had been residents there before becoming homeless. Typically between 80 and 90% in the heart of winter speaks to that these folks would rather stay in the communities that they know, in the communities that they've been residents in. They're not willing to go to, other sort of counties or other regions that they're not comfortable in, that they're not familiar with, simply to seek assistance. They would much rather be in the communities where they've been living. Over the past, actually in 2015, there were 17 states that saw an increase in some level of homelessness. California was the only state in the whole United States that saw an increase in men, women, and children. Additionally, California currently ranks 49th in the nation in terms of housing units per capita, per individual. And recent studies also suggest that there's about 40 million residents in the state of California, and there's about 25 million units to accommodate those residents. So with that massive housing shortage, there's a huge deficit in wage and the cost of housing and being able to afford housing. And so the 2015 numbers I shared, with those numbers booming, to Dr. Henwood's point earlier, continuums of care are housing folks better and quicker than they ever have before. However, the sort of part of cause of homelessness due to the lack of housing stock is just pumping folks into that sort of circumstance, making it challenging for these systems to respond. And so I would suggest that the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless, having been operating for the last 2 years in the midst of this sort of housing crisis across the state, in the midst of the rise in homeless numbers, those two things are not related at all. And they just simply happen to be functioning at a time when homeless numbers are increasing in California as they are not in any other state.
Thank you, that's really insightful. And Cheyenne, can you follow up on that second part of that question? What are your thoughts on a permanent shelter here in Tahoe, and do you think it would attract homeless people to come here for those services?
We need a permanent shelter. That's just the bottom line. I don't think people are going to come here to live in our shelter. Like Marissa said, most people that come through the warm room are local people. We need to help our fellow man, for the lack of a better word, I guess. We need to help our community. We need to get people off the streets. We need to get them housed. We need to get them resources, and we need to make them better. We need to be a community that comes together and supports this. They're not just going to come here to live in Tahoe, to live in a shelter. It's not a glamorous place to be in a shelter. It's not like, woo, this is great, because a lot of times it's not. You're bunking with 20 other people, and it's not fun. I did want to stress a point to the question earlier about the transient situation, and maybe people do come here. Youth do come here. That it happens. But of the 50 unduplicated homeless clients that I've had in the last year, only 20 of them have been from out of town, and every single one of them we have found family reunification. So the goal is to get them back home, back to their support groups, so that they know where they're going, what they're doing, and being around people that care about them. But back to your, yes, I think there needs to be a permanent shelter, and I don't think people are going to come here just to stay in that shelter.
Thank you, Cheyenne. This question is for Rabbi Yakar. You mentioned a little bit of the things that are going on at the Temple Bat Yam, and also your collaboration with the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless. So what do you see as some promising avenues for coordination on solving this underlying issue? What are some of the highlights that you've seen that you can maybe try to encourage other people to be a part of?
I have no idea. I think I'm really heartened by Pastor Turner's efforts to bring the clergy together, that the institutional response that we can coordinate with and create that partnership is going to have a lot more lasting effect and a lot stronger effect than us doing things individually. And as much as the work of our individual members and parishioners is yeoman's work, it will be so much better if we can organize our faith communities to say, you know, these 4 programs, these 2 programs during the year, we're going to all rally together and we're going to work together on it. I don't know what that looks like. I've never done it before. If you are part of a faith community on the South Shore here and have a relationship with your pastor, your minister, whoever it is, let them know that you think that that would be a good idea to start that conversation. Let's do it. Let's have that conversation. The faith communities are not here to be the social service providers. It's a part of what we do because it's part of our mission. It's part of what we believe in. It's part of our charge to care for our neighbors and to be part of a community. We have lots of other things that we like to do as well, and sharing our traditions and our various perspectives and teaching and learning and growing and all of those things. There was another part to your question that I'm forgetting, but in terms of the piece that really struck me of addressing directly the problem, Matt, about that systemic piece to it, and Dr. Henwood spoke about it, right, and he used the words about pulling people downriver, right, that we need to know why they're getting in the river in the first place, right? We need to know why people end up in this, and I think I've heard some great things about the flipping the system on its head and understanding that we're not going to change people necessarily, but we need to get them housed. And it makes me think about, right, that all those times we're uncomfortable with the services we do provide, or people who are dealing with homelessness and the stigma that's out there and we sweep it under the rug. The reality is that people who are struggling, as Abraham Maslow taught us, the great social scientist, right, without shelter, people have no chance. They have no chance of being able to stand on their own 2 feet. And when people don't have shelter and don't have a support network and can't clean up to go to a job interview and don't feel like anybody cares about what happens to them, whether it's perception or reality, our job as community members is to show them that they do matter and we do care. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's really uncomfortable. But we still need to do it. Because as I don't remember who it was spoke about, that the health care costs alone for dealing with people who struggle with homelessness and insufficient housing is going to cripple this country. That's what I believe in looking at the research and being taught by Dr. Muscat over the last 2 years about the stuff going on with the coalition. It is literally going to cripple our nation. And if you don't see that, then we need to look deeper, right? The healthcare costs alone, because we provide that healthcare. So we need to create the system, create the communities across the board, and let us be the example. Let us on South Lake be the model. So talk to people, figure out how we can do it. I'm here, I'm available, let's have the conversation.
Thank you. This question is geared toward Dr. Muscat and also Lieutenant Stevenson. And this mainly deals with wintertime conditions. Is there any sort of animal cruelty violation, Lieutenant Stevenson, for having dogs outside in these snow and harsh conditions? And then for Dr. Muscat, are dogs welcome inside the homeroom, or inside the warm room?
So, as you guys know, our operations are temporary. We have had a 3-month lease and a 4-month lease, actually a 4.5-month lease last year. And our space is limited and our leases did not permit us to have pets in the building. And there are actually specific shelter best practices that are recommended if you're gonna operate an emergency shelter where you have dogs in crates in a different area and special staff to address their problems. And we have not tackled that problem. And so service animals are welcome in the warm room, as they should be, but we have not welcomed other pets at this time, basically just based on logistics.
Not really. Cruelty to animals. Dogs are pretty happy. As long as they're fed, they curl up, they snuggle, helps keep people warm. I haven't really run into that. I don't want to speak for animal control, but people can sign their animals over to animal control if they or a friend or whatever, but I haven't run into it too much. Is it technically illegal to be cruel to animals? Yes, absolutely, but I haven't run into that.
I appreciate that. We're going to go right back to Dr. Muscat, if you don't mind. I've got one here. You're the star. Many unhoused individuals identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender and/or gender nonconforming, and many face discrimination and even violence in shelters around the U.S. How are we as a community ensuring homeless services that are not just tolerant of, but open and affirming to LGBT individuals, specifically transgender individuals?
I would say that we do have a non-discrimination policy at our organization, and we do our best to not discriminate against anyone, whether it's anything related to being lesbian, gay, or transgendered, or bisexual. But based on what we do in the warm room, we essentially, that is our primary project, and so our guests tend to come to us. We aren't doing a lot of outreach to any specific individuals of any specific race or gender or sexuality. We did this year, after working with the police department, decide to pay some of our staff to do some advocacy work and resource education at Bread and Broth. So at those community meals, anyone who has questions about homeless services or housing or really any resource, our staff are helping connect people. But that's not a specific, we don't have any specific outreach for that, but I do believe we try very hard to maintain a safe place for all of our guests, so that they are protected from both discrimination and violence.
And just a quick follow-up on that, because we did have a little bit of a common theme here. How does the warm room address possible sex offenders in the same space as women and children?
So sex offenders are actually supposed to report that they are a sex offender when they are in certain areas. So if the warm room is near a school, for example, they would not be allowed to be in the warm room. We ask guests when we do a intake process if they are a sex offender. But we actually do not keep children in the warm room because we feel that that is a liability, and that is why instead we try to keep our families intact in a motel room. So we have resources for up to 1 week for families, and there are a lot of services through the county, and people with families with children can get a lot of access to those services, but it takes some time. So Amanda Hammond, who works for the El Dorado County of Education, is the McKinney-Vento advocate in the Lake Tahoe Unified School District, and she reached out to us and said, hey, we used to provide 1 night of housing, and she said that really is hard for me to get people connected. So we serve families in that way so that they aren't in the warm room, so that children under the age of 18 are not in the warm room.
If I might add a few statements related to the question about LGBTQ and ensuring access to housing. Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless and Tahoe Youth and Family are engaged, as was mentioned, in the continuum of care. And it's a requirement of HUD continuums of care that there are policies and procedures related to ensuring equal access to housing opportunities, regardless of one's gender, of any protected class or sexual preference. So there are strict policies and procedures that have been drafted in terms of the coordinated entry process, as well as data collection and full disclosure of all release of information to folks as they're coming into the system, so that they can assess who might be accessing their database, which would be all the general member agencies who participate in the continuum of care. And should somebody select that they do not want their information shared, that would not prevent them access to the system. They would certainly be accommodated. Their information just couldn't be accessed by other agencies who utilize the database. So through the COC, strict policies and procedures are drafted to accommodate the LGBTQ community, ensuring equal access to housing.
All right, thank you. I have a question from a homeless member of our community. As a homeless person that has been taken advantage of in local housing and employment, are there any protections for my well-being? I don't know who exactly would want to answer this, or if there's even an answer for that, but I would leave it open to the panel.
That's not a very specific question, but if you're the victim of a crime, yes, call us, we will help.
Okay.
I think it's a more general question than that, but I'm dying here, help me.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
If you're
What
a
I would
victim
say
of
is that,
crime,
you know, Housing First programs try to ensure that folks get housed as quickly as possible. And so in a more robust continuum of care, should there not be a housing unit available, which is often the case in California, COCs seek to create what's called bridge housing, which communities are sort of transitioning their one-time homeless shelters into a temporary bridge housing opportunity, which would be able to stabilize somebody, allow them to have a roof over their head and services offered while that permanent unit is being sought. And so through that system, ensuring that there's a flow through and getting somebody housed and stabilized and safe as quickly as possible, regardless of one's background. The system would not discriminate against anything. The goal is to get somebody housed permanently and supported with the services that would keep them safe and provide them the opportunity to retain that housing.
All right, thank you. This next question is for Dr. Henwood. In your research, have you seen a correlation between a lack of affordable housing in communities and a rise in homelessness?
Yeah, actually, there was a really good study that came out a couple of weeks ago from, I believe, some economists that were working at Zillow, actually, because they have great data on sort of the housing market, and they were just showing, given the lack of sort of affordable housing, that for every 5% increase in rents, we should expect to see an additional 2,000 people become homeless in Los Angeles. And so their data and their analysis was pretty spot on, and I think it kind of speaks volumes to this issue around what's driving a lot of the increases.
Wow. Can you just repeat that? Can you just repeat what you found in LA one more time for everybody to hear that, what that correlation was?
Sure. So the report that came out showed that, given the sort of limited supply of affordable housing, that for every 5% increase in rents, an additional 2,000 people will become homeless. So that was the correlation between rental market and rates of homelessness.
Thank you, Dr. Henwood. I guess this one is for the panel as well. This was submitted here today. Is it cost-worthy to have a homeless camp with restrooms and showers in the summertime so they can begin to be productive citizens? Maybe that's for you, Daniel, from the county. I don't know if the county's looked into that or if Marissa and Dr. Muscat has anything to contribute as well.
Yeah, I can say that it's critical to offer services to folks. I mean, everybody needs to use the restroom. Everybody needs to, keep good hygiene. It's good public health. And so it is important for communities to be creative in, ensuring that folks have access to services. It's also worth noting that there are some misunderstandings with sort of the culture of homelessness. And a lot of people, imagine the sort of scruffy, dirty individual as the face of homelessness. But data across the nation suggests that only 15% of the homeless population nationally are actually chronically homeless. So the vast majority, about 85%, are not the visible homeless that folks see on the street. So, it's really important to ensure that people understand that for those 15%, sometimes it can be a safety mechanism. So if you smell bad, it might deter law enforcement from approaching you. Or if you're a female, for example, and you smell or you look disheveled, or if you act a little bit off, you might deter somebody from trying to take advantage of you. And so those are some things that are developed as defense mechanisms. And somebody who may not understand that might sort of misconstrue why somebody might be dirty or might not look approachable. But I do think it's important to offer services to folks. Again, if folks are concerned with somebody defecating or urinating somewhere, having access to a restroom is sort of a basic way to alleviate that. And it's critical for systems and linkages of services to gear toward permanency. There have been references all evening about treating the symptoms of homelessness, and in terms of an illness, it's important to treat symptoms of an illness, but if you don't sort of gear the treatment to address the root cause, then you never sort of end the illness. And so it's critical that services to treat symptoms geared folks towards permanency as much as possible.
I wanted to add one thing because there was a mention about if it was financially viable, I think, in that question, to offer those services. Eldorado Opportunity Knox tried to gather some research on the cost of a person who's homeless to our county, and I think this number is from 2014 or 2015, but it was estimated that in our county we spend $35,000 per year on one individual who's homeless if we take into account the services that they access, like police department or jail or emergency rooms or hospital stays. So if you think about that, if we took that $35,000 for that one person as a county and instead put that money towards rent or towards housing, I mean, you could house someone for half of that. So from a cost perspective and for a financial perspective, Housing First not only is proven to put people in homes and keep them from becoming homeless, it's also more cost effective than all the stuff that we've been doing instead.
I'd like to add on to that is, like, if you just have an encampment with portaloos, it's not solving a problem. It's a Band-Aid to a real life situation, so it has to go back to permanent supportive housing.
Thank you. All right, well, we're going to try to stay on time here, so I want to kind of go to a question just for the entire panel, and I think it's a pretty good one here. You know, we've talked a lot about what's being done, and it seems like there's some Band-Aid approaches like what Cheyenne was just mentioning, which is better than nothing. But if you have a big, bold idea that you think would have the most positive impact on this issue, what do you think that idea is? And we'll go ahead and maybe start on the end with Lieutenant Stevenson. You're on the front line all the time and 40-year resident. Just go ahead and put you right on the spot.
Big, bold idea. I wasn't prepared to give big, bold ideas. I'm in my super suit tonight. It's a very complex issue. It involves money, it involves people and lives, and there's a balance in there somewhere. It's very difficult to find that balance. And if anyone comes up with, you know, like an E equals MC squared equivalent to how to dial in a community to find that balance and provide those services, then that'll be the answer.
I have to echo what you said, that I don't have any big, bold ideas either. I think I have a vision of moving our county towards housing first and rapid rehousing, and that's going to take collaboration from our city council and from our county and from organizations who are in charge of our building codes and environmental things like the TRPA. And I think that my big, bold idea is to encourage all of those groups to get together and to talk about this and to work on this issue, and hopefully house more and more individuals and address some of the prosperity issues in our community so that we have affordable housing, we have living wages, and we can have some prevention in that way. So that's maybe an awesome idea, but I don't have any of the, we're starting from the ground up trying to do that, and it'll take time.
I think that there's a couple of things that would be my big, bold idea. One is that if each of us takes it upon ourselves to remove the stigma that we carry, I carry it, about those who deal with homelessness and those who are insufficiently housed, and do our best to tuck that away and get rid of it, so that we can be kind and open to all those in need for whatever their needs are. I think that if we shift the way that we look at responding to and providing resources and providing money and providing things that cost us money, and stop thinking about it that way, but thinking about it as an investment in the future of our community. That if we invest in the future of our community, we're creating a space that everybody can be cared for at some basic level. And I think the ROI there, the return on investment there has the potential to be huge. I think there are also examples that Marissa has pointed out to me and taught me over the last couple of years in getting to work with her about a little bit of a shell game that municipalities and communities play with their budgets. That if we can be creative about how we shift budgets, and I'm not going to give examples because it hurts in the short term. But if you take budgets that are burdened, as Marissa pointed out, $35,000 by the county spent on services given to an individual, if we figure out a way to stem that in advance and put those budget items or those budget lines or those resources into dealing with the systemic realities of homelessness, in the midterm and the long term, that's the big, bold idea. Because if we can do that, then at least for the next generation and the next generation of those who might deal with homelessness, we'll be seeing something better. I want to respond to a question that came earlier and interrupt for a moment because I have the microphone. Somebody spoke about who has dealt with homelessness, about being taken advantage of. I just want to put out there that if there's veracity, if there's truth to your story, or you know somebody who's dealt with that and been taken advantage of, I know that there are faith leaders in this room tonight who will support you and help you get that rectified. I will at least listen to your story and figure out what the resources out there, and I know that people at the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless will. So we do care about you, and you should know that.
Well, that's hard to follow. My big, bold idea would mirror and echo everything that's been said up here. One of the dreams that I think a lot of people have in this community would be a one-stop shop kind of place where you could bring somebody in and there would be a mental health provider, there would be a substance abuse counselor, there would be a youth provider, there would be a representative from the Tahoe Coalition, there would be someone from Health and Human Services, and they would go from door to door or room to room, however you would put it, where they would get the services that they needed right then. Because when you're homeless and you're going and you're trying to get all these services, it is so difficult to advocate for yourself. So if they could go one place, we could help with all those services and help them progress. That would be my big, bold idea. My other one would be is us as a community to be more involved and start taking care of our homeless people and not stigmatize them, push them away, or think it's something dirty and wrong, and they're not trying, because a lot of these people they're really trying to better themselves. It's just a very difficult situation to be in. If you haven't been there, you should try it. You should step in the shoes of a homeless person for one day and see how long you last. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheyenne. We'll go to Dr. Henwood next. Dr. Henwood?
Oh, okay, thanks. So I'll just throw out an idea that's not at all mine, but it's one that has been vetted by the Congressional Budgets Office as a feasible option, though maybe not politically. But the vast majority of housing subsidies in this country go to people who don't actually need them for housing. So if you just look at total federal expenditures on housing subsidies, the biggest portion goes for mortgage interest deductions. So the larger mortgage you have, the more you can deduct. That essentially is a subsidy that wealthy Americans are receiving. And the amount that they get is huge in comparison to the amount we spend on sort of Section 8 programs or affordable housing. And if you were simply to cap the amount that people could do that, say earners over $200,000, or even just get rid of it altogether, you would be able to make the Section 8 program an entitlement. So basically give people a right to housing. So that the numbers are there. It actually works. It's possible. It just, a lot would have to change for people to redistribute money in that way.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And then Daniel, of course.
So my big, bold idea sort of echoes Dr. Henwood's statement in a way, in that ultimately since the 1970s, so over the past 40 years, for every 100 people added to the state of California population, there have been 32 units built to accommodate those folks. So I mentioned earlier that California ranks 49th in the nation in housing units per capita, about 40 million residents, about 25 million, there's housing for about 25 million. So we're about 15 million units short to accommodate these folks. We need to figure out ways to develop enough housing to meet the number of folks who live in our state. It sort of seems like a no-brainer, but ultimately wage needs to equate to decent housing over somebody's head. And when there's a massive lack of housing stock, the prices skyrocket. And so there's a whole class of people who, as Dr. Henwood said earlier, are on the verge of homelessness. And there are certain folks who on a given day may become homeless and can get out. And there are other folks who simply just fall out, and without a system response that can help them recover from their situation, it just perpetuates. So I think there's a commonality among the folks on this panel tonight in that we're all some level of service provider, some level of community member or agency that provides services to folks. And certainly services are needed to stabilize people and to create opportunities to become self-sufficient. However, homelessness in and of itself is at its core a housing issue. And so unless we figure out creative ways to develop housing, homelessness will perpetuate. And those numbers I mentioned, it's sort of a no-brainer why California currently has about 25% of the homeless population in the United States. With the housing shortage numbers, with those percentages, and with the research, it seems very apparent that until there's statewide sort of policies that ensure that local jurisdictions can accommodate housing development, can lower barriers for developers, then we can sort of react to this and hopefully start to chip away at what's become decades in the making in California.
Thank you. Just want to echo a couple things or just touch on a few topics here. We did receive a couple little notes and I want to address them. Somebody asked if the homeless community was invited. Absolutely. There was no intentional leaving people out. So this is a public forum. We put posters up all over town. And we're glad to have some of them here today, so I want to thank everybody in attendance. And then also had another one as well asking why there wasn't somebody against homeless people here at the podium. We did ask quite a few people that we know personally that in this community who are against having a warm room, who are against any kind of assistance, and they all declined to be on the board, on the panel. The reasons were varied, but most people just don't want to speak out against this in public. So for those that were wondering why this is the way it is, we just wanted to make sure that there's full transparency. There's no agenda here. We want to just try to shed a little bit of light on this very touchy issue. As my good friend Evan said, like it's complicated. It's emotional. It's there are no easy solutions. So again, I would love to thank the panelists for being here tonight, and also the panelists for joining us via Skype and dealing with some technology. Sometimes it isn't easy to get here into Tahoe, and this is the second time we've done it. And it's always great when we can get people from out of the area to join us here in our small community. Would also love to thank the Beach Retreat and their amazing staff for once again hosting us. They are incredibly generous with this space. We could not do it without them. They're a major sponsor of ours, and so is the Tahoe Production House as well. Outstanding. Definitely donate their time and resources. They will have the recorded video up in the next couple of weeks on our website, TahoeTRYP.org. That's Tahoe, TRYP.org. I would love to thank the Civic Engagement Committee and also the TRYP volunteers that helped put this on. It isn't an easy task, but we do pull it off. Also want to mention our next town hall is going to be on October 18th, and it's going to cover Measure C, which is a local initiative here in the city of South Lake Tahoe to potentially repair our roads through a sales tax. So stay tuned for details on location and time for that, along with panelists. And if you want to continue this conversation, some of us are going to be down in the tavern, which is located adjacent to this building here at the Beach Retreat. And all we implore you to do is just get involved and make sure your voice is heard. If you have a belief, you're okay to express it. That's the beauty of this nation. And once again, want to thank you all for spending your evening with us tonight.